that they imported either from social democracy in the UK, the Labour Party of the UK, or from France, or from Germany, cartels, very interesting. Certainly from Mussolini's Italy, they did meet with Mussolini, and also from Soviet Russia. And that's an adjustment to the standard history, because if in the standard history you mention this influence of abroad at all, you do it parenthetically. And if you expand on it, the reason you don't expand on this is because you run the risk of being called a right-wing red baiter. And it doesn't matter if you're a McCarthyite or a right-wing red baiter or whatever. I mean, the names don't mean a thing. I think what is important is to see the serious extent to which these foreign models did impress the New Dealers and did express themselves in policy. One of the characters I followed through the book is a wonderful professor, really likable man named Rex Tugwell, who came from rural New York, where the agriculture was extremely depressed. There was an agriculture depression in the 20s before the general depression of the 30s. And when he saw what he saw in Russia and came to America, he said, I'm going to replicate some of that. And he, towards the end of the book, made his very own animal farm, his own sort of idealistic utopian farm in Casa Grande, Arizona. And thanks to some documents that I found, we can describe what happened at that farm. And what happened at that farm was what usually happens with collectivism. It was a nice idea in theory, but it didn't work out. Because when the people went on the collective farm, they wanted to be together, but they were also ambivalent about sharing private property. Right down to the chicken coop, there was a farmer who was observing the collective chicken coop, and he said, I like the idea of the collective chicken coop. It seems to be more efficient. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but I keep forgetting which chicken is my chicken. And which chicken is my chicken? That's the question. You know, I like to share the tractor, but is it really my tractor? And the people fought with one another, just as people do, because people don't share very well. They like to have property of their own. They like to have their own car, not share a car. And they even, which was very sad, because it was a wonderful little farm that Tugwell tried to have, trashed the community room. And that was emblematic of what happens when government imposes a collective situation. You can voluntarily go in an association and have a community room, and it usually works out, whether it's religion or some other kind of group. But when the government does it, it tends not to work out. And Tugwell was very upset at his farm and quite honest about it, and had one of his students publish a documented book about this to just have a record of what happened. I'm just going along. What else? Roosevelt. He did indeed. One of these myths is right. Roosevelt did inspire confidence. He was a very important figure to our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. He did have a great radio voice. The times were dark, and the voice did shine in the darkness. There were things that he did. I didn't know what I would think when I was beginning the book. By the end, I decided I thought they were superb. One was the creation of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Another was the creation of deposit insurance, so that if the bank loses your money, the government makes some of that back, or the government and the banks. I grew up in a culture that did not approve of deposit insurance. I decided that it was great by the end of it. Many other things, helping farmers out with their loans and so on, were very, very important things for the time. But Roosevelt's econ generally wasn't merely not great, it was terrible. It was terrible. His policies hurt business. They made the Depression longer. Both Hoover and Roosevelt together made the Depression longer. How did they do it? In the book, I try again to tell a story to capture how it is. The centerpiece of the New Deal was something called the National Recovery Administration. We have our NRA. They had their NRA, National Recovery Administration. And it was based on these very foolish premises, such as consumer choice gets in the way of economic recovery. Lowering your price gets in the way of economic recovery. Being too free as a businessman gets in the way of economic recovery. And it went after, it regulated businesses, and if a business did not follow the rules, it was prosecuted. It was an egregious law, and it was modeled, in this instance, on Italian fascism and German cartels. It advantaged the big businesses at disadvantage to the small business. Well, you can imagine it was unpopular. Its emblem was the blue eagle. So they said, if you don't follow this, you're not patriotic. And it was quite unpopular, and it was contested a lot in the courts. So the administration said, we have to get the Supreme Court to back us up and say, this is constitutional, and shut down all these little lawsuits. What are we going to do? We're going to target a business that we can definitely prove is an evil business and show that it's violating the NRA. And we'll get a business that's really easy to slam and to scapegoat, and then we'll win just the way they won with Al Capone, a dirty business. So the business that they picked was a chicken business. So you see I have a poultry theme today. A chicken business called ALA Schechter Poultry, and some of you may have talked about it in law class. The chicken business was in Brooklyn, and there are a number of reasons they targeted it. One is that chicken slaughter is disgusting. So it was easy to sue someone who kind of looked dirty, when the chicken slaughterers did literally look dirty, and you saw them in their pictures with their butcher clothes on. Two, it was the Supreme Court had already established that chicken trafficking was interstate commerce, and so that was something under federal jurisdiction. Three, it had a health edge to it, just like China. When we talk about China now, we end up talking about lead toys for children from China. People were dying in those days from meat. There was tuberculosis. There were no antibiotics, so you could die from a sick chicken. And one of the allegations of the government prosecutors was that this little chicken business was selling sick chickens. And in law, we called this the sick chicken case. When I started, I went back, I want to look at the sick chicken case. But the little chicken people, who were the Schechters, who were new to America, like Al Capone's culture, an ethnic culture, they barely spoke English, they spoke Yiddish, were very upset. And they knew they had to fight back because they were going to go to jail and lose their business. And the federal prosecutors were saying they were bad. And they fought back, and it went to the Supreme Court, and they won. Little chicken people from Brooklyn stopped the most egregious aspect of the New Deal. We can talk about this more in question time, but I found them very brave. There was an element of religion in this story, because they were kosher chicken butcherers. They were following a bunch of rules about how they butchered the chicken. Kashrut, the kosher rules, are like a sort of medieval FDA. There are a bunch of rules, and you follow them, and if you don't follow them, you are exiled from your community. Religious Jews eat only kosher meat. So when the government came along and said, your chickens are sick, they weren't worried about what Washington and federal government said about their chickens. They were worried that they would be shamed in their community because kosher law says no sick chicken is to be sold. So they were ashamed. And that's one reason they fought back and went to the Supreme Court. And I had never known this until I looked at the testimony, and it was clear as day. They were worried about Washington, but they were also worried about a higher authority, that they were their own people would think they were offending God by selling bad chickens. And I actually have a poem in the book. When they won, they were so happy. I came to love them very much. One of the wives wrote a poem about what it was like to win after the government had said they were dirty and they'd been in court for so long, and their husbands had been in jail and so on, waiting it out. No more excuses to hide our disgrace. With pride and satisfaction, I'm showing my face. For a long, long time to be kept in suspense, sarcastic remarks made at our expense. I'm through with that experience, I hope, for all my life, and proud again to be Joseph Schechter's wife. So you get a story of people all over the country. People knew the New Deal rules were wrong, and they were being humiliated by them, and they were fighting back. And the Schechters were the emblem of that. And you see it, how do we know this empirically? You can look at the data as well and see the economy was recovering. It always seemed to be recovering, but it never got back all the way.